is an uncommon tactic, and it usually, when it has happened, it's more to speed up a case. But in this circumstances, you're saying it's to slow down the case as much as possible to avoid, an appeal to the Supreme Court.
That's correct. This is all about delay, delay, delay. There is no other excuse for this. And keep in mind that the Fourth Circuit is not like the First Circuit, which is like for example, in the First Circuit out of Boston, Stephen, there is, as best as I can tell, there's really no 3-judge panel that you can get in the First Circuit Court of Appeals out of Boston, New Hampshire, that part of the country, that could possibly give rise to a Second Amendment ruling that's favorable to gun owners as a general matter. But that's not the case with the Fourth Circuit. The Fourth Circuit is really split 7-6. So it's really evenly divided. But what you have in the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals out of Virginia and Maryland is a hyper-partisan, aggressive, liberal bent court that even though it's a narrowly divided court, the majority is hyper aggressive, and they act that way on these politically charged cases, such as the Second Amendment. And it's, to me, a blatant power grab. And it will not be lost on the U.S. Supreme Court when the time comes. These games that we're seeing by the courts of appeals, this will be brought to the fore at some point, and the Supreme Court's not going to like it.
And you see this as part of a broader tactic to try and delay gun cases generally, especially in these more liberal circuits. I guess the Ninth Circuit might be another sort of parallel here, where it's a relatively divided court, but leans heavily to the left in the same way. And they also take up a lot of these these cases en banc as well.
Yeah, I think, of course, there's two related things going on. One is there are still judges out there. Keep in mind, judges are government employees. We must never lose sight that judges really are employed by the government. And, there's and Republican judges, if you want to call them that, Republican nominated judges, they really fall into kind of two categories. And it's important that the gun movement understand this. The first category, which is a much greater category, thanks to President Trump and Mitch McConnell and sort of the work they did with appointing judges during the Trump years, are originalists. They are trying to interpret the Constitution as it was written in the 18th century, no different than any other social or other contract. What did the people mean when they wrote down these words? What was the intent when they adopted this document, the Constitution? But then you have another strain, which is becoming more I would say more of the vintage type judges, older judges like Harvey Wilkinson on the Fourth Circuit, who's a Republican appointee, and many people consider conservative, but on issues like guns, he's absolutely horrific. So the point is, these Republican appointed judges that are a little bit more of an older vintage, in many instances come across or are law and order conservatives. Now, the problem with law and order conservatives for the Second Amendment is they tend to presume that the police and the government are always right. And whatever's best for the police, the law enforcement community, and the government is good because they consider that to be being a good law and order person. But the reality is that they will sacrifice the right of the people to keep and bear arms in the name that it makes the job of the government, i.e. police, harder. But of course, the entire purpose, Stephen, of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights is indeed to make the job harder for the government to take away our freedoms. That is a feature and not a bug. So one of the issues you have on some of these courts is even when you have Republican appointed judges, you sometimes have those who are of a law and order variety, and they can be problematic on Second Amendment issues because they view being good on you and I having a gun as somehow being bad on cops having guns, or, cops dealing with criminals, because usually when guns pop up in a court, and this is the reality, you and I are not the party in a case involving guns in most courts in most of America on most days. The reality is, if you're a judge dealing with a gun that's appearing in court, inevitably, 99% of the time, it's relating to a gun-related violent crime, and you're putting somebody in prison. So when a judge sees gun issues pop up in front of them, it's usually not the Firearms Policy Coalition, the NRA, or the Second Amendment Foundation litigating. It's usually, again, a gangbanger or some other, psychopath or thug with guns doing bad things. So they kind of have this bias in favor of law enforcement against gun toters because that's what they see in their courts. And I do think that ultimately causes a prejudice against the Second Amendment. We're much better off today than we used to be, but that is something we in the Second Amendment community must be aware of, that dynamic.
Yeah. No, I think that's certainly a dynamic that does exist in the courts. But I want to get at this idea that I've heard, especially from people in California, right, who deal with the Ninth Circuit a lot, that they can get wins at the lower circuit or at the lower court levels, even the appeals court level, but that the court in the Ninth Circuit exclusively takes those cases when they do win to an en banc hearing, and then the gun rights advocates lose. And that sounds very similar to what you're describing here with the Fourth Circuit situation. And it's kind of perhaps part of the larger strategy that you've laid out about delaying these cases in the post-Bruin world, where the Supreme Court still has a 6-3 majority of it's the same basic majority that was on the court when Bruin was handed down. So is that what you mean? Like, you see that not just in the Fourth Circuit, but also the Ninth Circuit and maybe the First Circuit, Second Circuit, some of these other left-leaning circuits?
Yeah, I think when it comes to the First Circuit out of Boston, there will never be a panel decision favorable to the Second Amendment. So they don't have to worry about en banc so much in the First Circuit, because I don't think there will be a panel decision in favor of the Second Amendment. That's Then you go out to the Ninth Circuit. So the way the Ninth Circuit has historically played it is they will let a panel of 3 judges decide a case. Sometimes they decide it favorably to the Second Amendment. And then, of course, the Ninth Circuit comes in as a whole and then will en banc that case and will then overturn it. By the way, it's a little trickier in the Ninth Circuit today, because after the 4 years of President Trump, that court is much more 50-50 between Republican appointees and Democratic appointees. So it's like back in the old days, it was a slam dunk for an en banc Ninth Circuit decision. If the Ninth Circuit took a case en banc, the Second Amendment was going to lose. It's a little bit trickier nowadays because the number of judges is more evenly split than it was, 5 or 6 years ago. So it's more of a coin flip in the Ninth Circuit. With that said, there's no doubt that the many judges on the Ninth Circuit want to do everything they can to prevent a Second Amendment ruling from taking hold. What's more offensive right now is what happened in the Fourth Circuit, which is, it's pretty clear what happened in the Fourth Circuit was there was going to be a very powerful and favorable ruling that was going to go out onto the books and into the public space in favor of the Second Amendment by a 3-judge panel of the Fourth Circuit. That was inevitable. That appeared to be inevitable after the oral argument well over a year ago. So what's offensive there is, rather than let the panel decision come out articulating their views as to why the Second Amendment protects AR-15s and semi-automatic rifles, instead, as my guess is, I don't have inside information, but just looking at the dynamic of the timing here, at the last possible minute, after these judges probably spent all their time writing up this opinion, it took them a year to do it or whatever it was, at the last possible moment before that decision could hit the news, could hit the docket, could be talked about by you and I on YouTube and so on, guess what happens? At the last possible minute, the Fourth Circuit en bancs it and prevents that decision from seeing the light of day. And then they delay it. And they're going to delay this, I'm sure, over a year, the way this game gets played. And that's just pathetic. So it's even worse what the Fourth Circuit did in the Bianchi case than what the Ninth Circuit does. Because at least in the Ninth Circuit, you have the benefit of the 3-judge panel explaining why, and you have the benefit of, like, Judge Benitez laying out their views about why the Second Amendment protects these weapons. And you can then, in the court of public opinion, look at one opinion and compare it. At least you have that benefit. You have complete information. In the Fourth Circuit, they essentially have buried the panel decision on purpose, as I see it. And it's absolutely pathetic, and it's not judicial. And I'm not saying it's unethical, but it's dirty pool.